Once one is established in his realization of the true self through bhakti yoga, all anxieties that appear due to material consciousness disappear. I mean, think about it. If I'm no longer attached to the notion of attaining some promotion or getting a fancy car, I can't feel the anxiety of not having those things. Therein lies the power of detachment. That doesn't mean that I can't have desires. It just means that I shouldn't be attached to attaining those desires. And in that state, I'm free to exist in the natural flow of the universe. If the promotion or the car come to me, great. But if they don't, that's fine too. Welcome back to Diary of Devotion's weekly study on the Bhagavad Gita. Let's jump into part 3 of chapter 2. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. This is a really exciting part of Bhagavad Gita because Krishna is going to begin to explain karma yoga to us. That is, the process of acting in the world, but without attachment for the results of those actions. Text 39, Krishna says, "Thus far I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruitive results. O son of Pritha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of works." So in the previous verses of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's just explained to Arjuna that he's actually an eternal soul. He's untouched by material change. One might then wonder how we should relate to the world and the work that's to be done in it within the context of this new way of thinking about ourselves. Krishna will now address that question. Text 40, Krishna says, "In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear." In ordinary, everyday endeavors in this material world, loss and diminution is inevitable. Any business that I start will come to an end. Anything I collect will ultimately turn to dust, and any public works that I engage in will one day become meaningless. And even if such things last far beyond my own death, one need only think of a time frame long enough for my projects to be destroyed and my name to be forgotten. Nothing lasts forever. We're seeking this eternality from temporary works. Endeavors on the path of yoga, however, are everlasting and not subject to decay. And why would this be so? The reason is that while material endeavors are directed toward the senses, which naturally either decay or grow accustomed to their objects, yoga is directed toward the innermost self, that which lies beyond the material senses. Krishna's already told us that this inner self is eternal and unchanging. Therefore, anything that's directed toward it must also be eternal and unchanging. I mean, think about it. It's impossible to direct your temporary senses toward the soul. It can't be seen, it can't be heard or smelled or touched, but it can be perceived. And when we begin to perceive it, we begin to move into the realm of that which is eternal. When we begin to move into the realm of the eternal, we naturally perceive it as constitutive of our true inner self. This practical experience of being a soul, which is available to anyone who engages in yogic practices, removes the most dangerous type of fear, namely the fear of death. When I recognize myself to be eternal and unchanging, how can I fear that I will someday come to an end? How can that possibility even enter my mind? I've already radically experienced myself as eternal and fundamentally connected to the divine. And nothing and no one can take that away from me once I've achieved it. Okay, Krishna continues in text 41. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. O beloved child of the Kurus, the intelligence of those who is irresolute is many-branched. For those who are controlled by their senses, rather than having their senses under control, the intelligence is utilized in so many fruitless activities. I mean, we could spend years getting an education to have a profitable profession, learning to maintain a house, properties, making relationships and connections that will cause us to be prosperous in this world, and as well as performing religious activities aimed at garnering the favor of some god for our own benefit. Even high-minded activities like pursuing philosophy or academic studies may uselessly take up valuable years of our life. Thinking this will someday make us happy, we endlessly pursue these branches of knowledge. However, these same activities, when offered to the Lord, can be tools used to transcend material existence. In this case, the singular aim of pleasing the Lord collapses the formation of karmas related to selfish desires and redirects them toward attaining that which is eternal. Thus, the resolute practitioner of yoga may externally appear very similar to the irresolute person. However, internally, one is singular in his purpose, and the other is merely following the many branches of his material desires. Okay, texts 42 through 43, Krishna says, "Men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to heavenly planets, resultant good birth, power, and so forth. Being desirous of sense gratification and opulent life, they say that there is nothing more than this." Okay, so this might take some explanation. Broadly speaking, the ancient Vedic texts of India consist of the 4 original Vedas, namely the Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva, as well as a corpus of literature that sprang from those 4 sources. These literatures include the great epic poems Ramayana and Mahabharata, as well as philosophical texts like the Brahma Sutras, guidebooks for proper conduct like the Manusmriti, and the widely popular Puranas, which are a library of books consisting of popular legends interwoven with philosophical ideas. Among the 4 original Vedas, particularly the Yajur, the proper conduct of rituals for promotion to the heavenly planets features prominently. These planets are understood to be temporary and material, much like the Earth. However, just as the hellish planets are designed to punish those who have committed sins, the heavenly planets are designed to reward those who are pious and good. Like the hellish planets, residence in these heavenly abodes is temporary. Once a person's pious merits are used up, like the funds in a bank account, they eventually return to the earthly realm. Constantly rising to the heavenly abodes and descending to the hellish abodes while spending the interim on earth is called samsara, or the cycle of birth and death, happiness and distress. And so even if we have a difficult time conceiving of heavenly and hellish realms, we may still easily understand that samsara affects us even in this one life. Sometimes we find ourselves in a happy mood, enjoying the fruits of material life. Sometimes we're just depressed, down, forlorn. And in the interim, we're often in a mood that lingers somewhere in the middle. These moods are caused by the same sense perceptions that bind us to repeated birth and death. Existing outside of these realms, or moods, is the transcendent realm of the Lord. In this realm, we're not subject to births, deaths, or different psychological states. We exist in blissful contact with the Lord at all times. Actually, we need only be resolute in this practice of bhakti yoga, and we can attain that state, which has been attained by many practitioners in the past. It might seem very high, far away, and impossible to attain, but actually, it's the birthright of each of us. At this point, it might be useful to explain something. It's often believed that Hinduism teaches good works, and as a result of those good works, one attains the heavenly planets. This is often criticized by Christian theologians who see no space in there for the grace of God. But actually, the works that are describing the attainment of those heavenly planets are thought to be temporary. It's merely another facet of this material world. So the eternal heaven that Christians believe in, and that Hindus believe in as well, is obtainable only through the grace of God and one's sincere wish to be with God. So the next time you hear that Hinduism promotes a doctrine of works, that's not exactly the case. In order to reach God's abode, the equivalent of the Christian heaven, we need the grace of God. Okay, let's move on. Text 44, Krishna says, "In the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, and who are bewildered by such things, the resolute determination for devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place." And this makes sense because how can I be resolute in transcending the material senses when I'm a slave to their whims? Therefore, the unruly senses must eventually be controlled by regulative principles. What are regulative principles? They're simply the things in life which regulate our actions in this world. It regulates the intake of sense pleasures. And what that means is that Maybe it's okay to have that slice of cake after offering it to the Lord, but I'm not going to have the whole cake. I'm going to put guardrails in my life to prevent me from going too far in one direction or the other. Those are regulative principles, and they're designed to free us from the shackles of slavery to the senses. Okay, text 45. The Vedas deal mainly with the subject of the three modes of material nature. O Arjun, become transcendental to these three modes. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. The three modes of material nature are understood to be sattva, or the mode of goodness, rajas, the mode of passion or excitement, and tamas, which is the mode of darkness or stillness. In the material world that we live in, these three modes of being are always acting upon the sentient and insentient objects of this universe. At times, we may have a predominance of the mode of goodness acting upon us, which makes us peaceful, satisfied, and content. At other times, the mode of passion or rajas may predominate, making us restless, eager to move or work, or impatient to attain a goal. At other times, the mode of ignorance or tamas may overcome us, impelling us toward things like laziness, apathy, and sleep. These three modes may combine in an infinite variety of ways and proportions, and the Vedas are the texts which deal with how to navigate and control these modes according to whatever desire the reader may have. If such a person desires to attain wealth, children, an attractive spouse, fame, whatever it might be, the Vedas prescribe the means to attain those things. But Krishna's imploring us to move beyond those three modes and their attendant karmic reactions and attain freedom from the dualities of material existence. Once one is established in his realization of the true self through bhakti yoga, all anxieties that appear due to material consciousness disappear. I mean, think about it. If I'm no longer attached to the notion of attaining some promotion or getting a fancy car, I can't feel the anxiety of not having those things. Therein lies the power of detachment. That doesn't mean that I can't have desires. It just means that I shouldn't be attached to attaining those desires. And in that state, I'm free to exist in the natural flow of the universe. If the promotion or the car come to me, great. But if they don't, that's fine too. Okay, Krishna goes on. He says, all purposes served by a small well can at once be served by a great reservoir of water. Similarly, all the purposes of the Vedas can be served to one who knows the purpose behind them. So the question might be asked, if the Vedas are considered holy texts, why would they lead people astray from the path of transcendence toward temporary results, which will ultimately serve to further entangle them in material existence? Ramanuja explains to us that for persons in whom the modes of rajas and tamas, that's passion and ignorance, predominate, the impulse toward liberation or from material existence may not naturally emerge. They're too busy enjoying this material world. They may not want to get out of it. So such a person may be so engaged in business or family activities that they hardly devote a moment to thoughts of the eventual death of their bodies or the ultimate goal of human life. Without guidance from the Vedas, these kinds of people will become bewildered at how to attain their many desires, the results of which would be that they will engage in unregulated activities like uncontrolled animal slaughter for food, unscrupulous business practices, environmental degradation, or even just alcoholism, drug abuse, and so on. Such are the results of an unregulated life. Thus, the Vedas serve as guidebooks to keep humanity within certain bounds of acceptable behavior. However, these boundaries are only available to those who choose to follow the injunctions within the Vedas. And to be sure, other holy texts from other traditions espouse the same kind of regulations. But when a society loses touch with its traditions of acceptable behavior, then the modes of rajas and tamas, or passion and ignorance, may act unchecked on the psyche of a person or a society. Nevertheless, there is something beyond even the careful regulation of material activities. As Krishna states in this verse, the great reservoir of transcendental knowledge not only serves to free one from material existence, it automatically situates one in right behavior. The reason for that is that it's the mode of sattva, or goodness, from which this knowledge is accessed. Therefore, even though the Vedas may be concerned primarily with material activities, since they serve to regulate these activities, they ultimately lead to sattva, or goodness, and eventually transcendence. This is the purpose behind the Vedas. So make no mistake about it, the Vedas do in fact show us a way to use works in order to attain good karmas. But that attainment is only intended to situate us in a consciousness of goodness so that we can move beyond that to the realm of God himself. Okay, text 47, Krishna says, "You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty." Ramanuja comments here that performing actions with a desire for the results of those actions brings about bondage. But performing actions with detachment, which are offered to the Lord, becomes a means for release. Further, instead of thinking ourselves to be the doer of actions and the cause of their results, this agency should be understood to belong to the gunas, that is, the material modes of nature, which we were just talking about, goodness, passion, and ignorance, which ultimately come from the Lord. Okay, Krishna goes on. Text 48, he says, "Perform your duty equipoised, O Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or failure. Such equanimity is called yoga." That's why a mature yogi may undertake many endeavors, but whether succeeding or failing, his sense of peace and equanimity is never shaken. Text 49, "O Dhananjaya," which is another name for Arjuna, "keep all abominable activities far distant by devotional service, and in that consciousness surrender unto the Lord. Those who want to enjoy the fruits of their work are misers." Okay, so what do we mean by abominable activities in this text? Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur states that what we translate as abominable activities are those activities in which the ultimate goal is one's own desired results. Rather, one should perform actions with the intent of offering them to the Lord. The intent to offer one's actions to the Lord, rather than to perform them for selfish purposes, tends to cleanse one of troublesome mind states like greed, envy, exploitation, etc., all of which are performed for one's own gratification. Thus, the simple act of placing the Lord before oneself automatically eliminates destructive activities. Think about it. You're basically training yourself to be selfless. And what you're putting before yourself is none other than the eternal source of everything himself. One may argue, however, that religious authorities have utilized this tendency to place the Lord before oneself as a tool to instigate others toward wicked actions. And there's no doubt about it. There's no shortage of examples of religious fervor being utilized to compel people toward genocide, murder, destruction, because they were convinced that it was the will of God. And we may easily respond to this argument by saying that those who would exploit and misguide the religious feelings of others are abusing the religious tendency of man. I think there's still yet a further argument to be considered. In the present text, Krishna's not just making an argument for the superiority of the transcendental perspective. He's planting his flag squarely on the side of dharma, or right action. The transcendental view, then, is not simply attempting to stand above the petty concerns of man. It's the promotion of justice, duty, and love of God. So he's not leaving it to chance here. He's giving us a verifiable tool to determine what the will of God actually is in any given circumstance. He's saying right here that it's coupled with dharma, right action, compassion, generosity, and love of the Lord. Broadly speaking, if actions result in leading one's consciousness towards seeing all living beings equally, acting with compassion toward them, and ever increasing feelings of love toward the Lord and his creations, then it's dharmic. Even the battlefield that we presently find ourselves on is a potential field for compassionate action, since the war is being fought to restrain the wicked from causing further harm to others, and ultimately to allow those who would engage in evil to rectify their mistakes. Krishna's going on. He says, "A man engaged in devotional service rids himself of both good and bad reactions, even in this life. Therefore, strive for yoga, which is the art of all work." Ramanuja comments here that this art requires great skill. Thus, it's something which must be striven for and practiced continually, with the expectation of occasional failures. Perfection is not to be expected immediately, or perhaps even for many lifetimes, but orienting oneself toward this goal with valiant effort produces compounding results even in this life. Text 51. By thus engaging in devotional service to the Lord, great sages or devotees free themselves from the results of work in the material world. In this way, they become free from the cycle of birth and death and attain the state beyond all miseries by going back to Godhead, meaning to go back to that realm of the Lord, that state of existence in which we're with the Lord constantly. And so Tripurari Maharaj states here that there's still something to be achieved after one's gone to that state which is beyond all miseries, namely the love of God. This progressive process will eventually be revealed to Arjuna by Krishna and consists of first acting without attachment to the results of one's actions. After the yogi becomes skilled in this way, he attains true knowledge of the self. This knowledge of one's actual nature relieves one from the dualities that lead to suffering. And in this state of even-mindedness, where the mind is no longer being pulled in 1,000 directions due to material desires, one is free to direct one's consciousness toward the Lord with love and dedication. Okay, we're going to leave it here for now. Join us again next time when Krishna discusses what it's actually like to have attained this position. Jai Shri Radhe.